Good morning, everybody. So yesterday we talked about starting this morning with the water and waste rate budget. I have a motion before me that resolution number 12 of the council budget meetings of January 8th and 9th be reconsidered. That was moved, well, I guess that would be Councillor Van Passen. Councillor Van Passen.
Would you like me to speak to that? Thank you, Madam Mayor. I asked that we reconsider the rates for the rate-supported budget. When in 2018 budget, one of the line items as an expense was $313,000 for debt repayment. That debt was never issued, so that money would have never been used. And I'd like to reconsider the whole rate that we set and put that $313,000 back into the 2019 budget and lower the rates accordingly for the ratepayers. It's basically money we collected, didn't use, so we should give it back. And I know we need a 2/3 majority whether we even reconsider that, but that would be my intention.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Huffman? Any further discussion? Councillor Columbus.
So I take it we are reconsidering the whole rate budget, not just a piece of it. That's the way I thought Councillor Van Passen's motion read.
That was not my impression at all. My impression was that we had already, with the holding tank and the septic was set. That was a separate motion, and that we were reconsidering that final acceptance that came later.
Is that the way it reads? Is this the one we've got worded out on page 2 here?
Yes, because that was a separate motion that was approved. That was carried, so we're not considering that piece.
Okay, if that's the way it's worded, I'll go with it.
Anything further? Okay, we'll take a vote. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, so now I guess the next thing would be I'll turn it over to you guys. And maybe you can just touch a little bit, I'm sure you will, in the presentation with the stabilization fund.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So Kathy had an excellent idea of giving you a printout of basically what transpired at the water and wastewater budget deliberations, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. From what staff understands is we want to consider freezing the 2018 rates across the board. So whether it's the water rates, the wastewater rates, and all of the related rates in that bylaw. And in order to do that, we need to find $480,000, because what the motion is on page 2, it states, the second line, it states that we are funding $18,406,000 from the ratepayers. So in order to freeze their rates, we need to lower that $18 million amount by $485,200. Originally, we talked about reserves, and it might have been misspoken on my behalf, and I apologize for that. We do not have a rate stabilization reserve. We did at one point, eons ago. However, what we have are capital replacement reserves for water. There's one for water and there's one for wastewater. And we take the surpluses at the end of the year and we put it in those reserves. And then we use that as part of the calculation 10 years out on whether we need to increase contributions to that reserve to replace our assets. We did ask for $200,000 increase in that contribution, because we're anticipating some hefty projects coming down the road. Mr. Baird will be presenting a report in February, basically on, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a water source protection type report, which would involve some significant capital projects. So we're anticipating we'll need those reserve funds. The original intent was to use the surplus money from 2017, so unfortunately we can't, and the treasurer is unfortunately saying no to that request. However, I do have an alternative if that is still something that council wishes to do. When we contribute to that reserve, the only way we can use that reserve money is for assets. It's in the bylaw, and so we can't use it to offset operating expenses, which is essentially what we're doing. So what we're proposing on page, the last page, page 5, if council wishes to freeze the 2018 rates, what we're proposing is to fund the $485,200 from whatever surplus we're anticipating for 2018. And we have calculated a very high-end estimate, and we are expecting a surplus, so we're not worried that that won't happen. However, if something happens, which, you know, until the books are closed, anything could happen, sort of thing, we can use perhaps the $200,000 contribution to the reserve as sort of a buffer if we need that extra few dollars in order to freeze those rates. So the way the resolutions are worded, or the recommendation is worded on page 5, if council were to decide to freeze the 2018 rates, that is staff's suggestion on how to fund the budget in order to accomplish what you're asking for. If there's any questions about any of that, I'd be happy to answer them, or Kathy would be happy to answer them.
Any questions from anybody? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If we freeze the rates this year, will your, through you to the Finance Department, will you likely be requesting a more dramatic rate hike in 2019 when we're going into 2020's budget?
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Taylor, that's an excellent question. It's a tricky one to answer. And I'm going to caveat by saying all else being equal is what I'm starting this with. And that means if the water and wastewater budget does not change substantially from 2019 to 2020, then yes, you will be starting off right off the hop, excuse me, with a $485,000 budget driver for 2020. When we fund items from a reserve, we call that a one-time funding. If we fund it from water and wastewater rates, that's an ongoing funding. That's an ongoing source of revenue. So if we have a one-time funding for any operating item, you have to start from scratch for the following year. That's why we use reserves for capital replacement rather than funding operating related items.
Councillor Van Passen.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I have talked to, or got some more information over the last couple of weeks, but when I looked at part of that $485,000 shortfall, last year, $313,000 was for repayment of debt that was never issued. So we've charged for that, but we never used it. So that's part of the reason why we have a surplus in 2018. And I'm suggesting if we move that 313, there will still be an increase in the rate, but just not as large as what was originally projected. So, you know, there would still be a slight increase, but not as much as was projected on the original draft of the budget.
I agree. Anything further? just out of curiosity, the portion of the development charges that we collect, how do they fit into the reserve, the water and waste reserve fund? Like, as we're looking at, I'm assuming some of this money is for our plants and so on. So what I don't understand is how the regular users, like when we have such high rates, and that's a big concern of people in Norfolk County, how does, why should the regular day-to-day user that's here, growth doesn't impact them when we build a new subdivision and we need more capacity in the water plant? Why are they being impacted by higher rates because to build a plant to have more people?
That's a good question, Madam Mayor. So development charges, as you said, is for growth-related projects. So when we collect the development charges, it's actually not actually revenue until we use it for a project. So it's deferred revenue, if you will. So when we collect development charges, it goes into a more of a liability account. It's a deferred revenue account. And then once the project comes up in the development charges bylaw where we are able to use development charges funding, then that's when we use it. So development charges don't really hit your rate budget. They're used for growth-related capital projects.
So on all of these drawdowns that I can see in the reserves, particularly in 2017 when it put it in, or 2016 rather, when it put it into a negative position, what were the projects during that time? Or maybe would you know, or maybe Mr. Barrett could answer?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, which projects?
Well, I see that the reserve fund in 2013, 2014 was being built up, and it was quite significant. And then right after 2014, during kind of the last council, that's when it started decreasing to the point where in 2016 it was actually in the negative. So I'm just wondering what did we do over that period of time that caused such a change in the reserves?
That would have been the Delhi wastewater treatment plant and likely the Waterford wastewater treatment plant. And so we're in a lull right now. Those projects have completed, and so those numbers would come down, or it would show, an impact on those reserves. And now they're gradually coming back up in anticipation of Simcoe and Dover's projects that Mr. Johnson had mentioned will be coming forward in the next year.
Here's the other thought that I have with this is in terms of when we look at next year, whether or not there's going to be a more significant increase and so on. I think that people need a break at some point. User fees go up, water and waste rates go up, big tax hike this year. I mean, at some point in time, as Mr. Van Passen, that money that was supposed to be there, was calculated in the budget, was supposed to fund debt. It was to fund debt that actually never came to fruition. And so to me, why should people be having to pay for that when it wasn't actually collected? In terms of next year, and to Councillor Taylor's question, whether or not we're going to have a more significant jump, well, you've seen personally the water and waste report that has hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings in there. So I hope that over the next year, we're going to be able to drive even more savings into that department and hopefully, make up that money and not see that situation next year and still be able to contribute to our reserve fund in the water department. But for me, I would like to see everybody finally, get a break somewhere. They're facing a tax hike, they're facing increases in user fees, but here's an opportunity to money that really shouldn't have been collected from them to give it back to people in Norfolk. So that's my feeling. Anyone else? Councillor Van Passen, did you want to make a motion?
I'm just not sure how to word it, but to reach if we put back that 313,000, we'd still need to collect an extra 172,500 to reach the projected requirement in the budget. So I need some advice from staff on how to word a motion to that effect.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Van Passen, the motion that we have on page 5 is what would staff recommend in order to freeze the rates. It sort of encompasses more of a general nature in order to make sure that we're able to do what you ask for without having year-end being finished or anything like that. So that's what staff recommends on page 5 as the motion.
Yeah, I'm fine with that motion as long as everybody understands the intent that,
Stephanie's just finishing, if you just give her 1 second, and then I'll read it out. While we're waiting, actually, Mr. Baird, I have another question. When I looked at, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I remember talking about it in between, let's say over the last 3-4 years, as we've experienced all of this growth. In fact, our water demand has remained, well, actually has decreased over that period of time, despite the fact that we're growing. However, our sewage has not, and particularly in the last year, there was quite a spike in it. And so the fact that the sewage and the water numbers don't match up, we know there's obviously a problem there with infiltration and so on. So what are we doing to address, that issue? The fact that part of our problem with our plants is this infiltration component.
That's a great question, Madam Mayor. Yeah, we know how much water we manufacture, and so we should be treating that same amount, with the exception of washing your car or watering your lawn. As Mayor Chop has said, the wastewater increases is because of a couple of factors. It's infiltration, so old systems, leaky pipes, water. Every time it rains or melt, like a day like yesterday, we'll see spikes in our wastewater treatment on that side. You'll also see, in some cases, where homes have sump pumps, and sump pump is supposed to discharge outside, and people, it's not uncommon not to have a wet spot on your lawn. You will put it into your laundry tub or connect it, hard pipe it into your sanitary system. So we're seeing those spikes, and we have a bylaw that allows us to make sure that wastewater goes where it should and stormwater should go where it should. So those are some of the things that we do have the ability, but we have to go door to door and say, where is your sump pump discharge? And even if we do, we get compliance. As soon as we leave, pipe goes back in the laundry tub. So those are areas that we need to keep an eye on. New development, we do have some pumps and their code requirements, but these are things we have to look at. As an example, in Port Dover, we have what we call a combined CSP. It's a big tank that basically takes that big surcharge that comes after a big storm event, and it holds it, and then we can release it into the wastewater treatment system once that surge goes down. So we're actually holding, instead of bypassing, chemically treating wastewater and discharging it. The ministry doesn't like us to do that, but if your systems become inundated, that's always a possibility. So we're looking at different ways how we can manage that.
One other quick question, just before I'll read them, and then I'll read the motion. But a resident also recently sent me a report from 2015 of all of the unaccounted for water in Norfolk County, and that it's somewhere around 15%. Would it be possible to get a report from you of the current state of unaccounted water?
I'm sorry, just so I understand, unaccounted water, that we mean the people that are receiving water that's not being metered, that sort of thing?
Well, that we're not, when we look at the metering, so when we look at the volumes that we've got at the plants, I believe it's not actually matching up with the amount that's being billed.
Okay, I'm glad to look into that for sure.
I'll get you a copy of
Yeah,
the
that'd be
report
great.
from 2015.
Yeah,
and
sure.
See if there's been something changed.
No problem,
Perfect.
thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so the motion reads as follows, that the proposed 2019 net rate requirement increase of $485,200 be funded from the 2018 surplus, and any excess surplus funds be transferred to the appropriate water and wastewater capital replacement reserve funds. That's moved. Oh. Okay, oh, sorry. And in the event that the 2018 surplus is less than 485,200, the approved increased contribution of 200,000 to the Water and Wastewater Capital Reserve Fund will be reduced accordingly.
I'd be happy to make that motion, Madam Mayor, and I should say, I don't think I have anybody in Ward 4 who's on town water and sewer, but since we're all on the same team, we try to make it fair for everyone, so.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ravitz. Any further discussion? Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. James, what does that put the increase at percentage or dollar-wise per household? Do you have that number?
So if I understand your question through the mayor to Councillor Columbus, so if we're freezing the rates, then there would be a 0% increase for...
0%.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Take a vote. All those in favor? It's carried. All right. I'll let you lead the charge here with the next item to get back to.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe we have some housekeeping items to deal with first thing. We gave out some handouts this morning, and once we go through those handouts, we will then continue along with our agenda, and I believe the Mayor and Council budget was next on the agenda, which I will introduce. But however, before we get to that, there are some handouts there that we can discuss. I can start with the first one, and then Kathy can talk about the others. We handed out, Councillor Michelli requested basically the percentages of wages versus overall expenses for municipalities in our geographic area. So that handout has been there, given to you. That excludes the rate budget, the water and wastewater budget, so that's strictly tax operating. And one of the things I'd like to point out is, just through discussions with the mayor this morning, I wanted to clarify, there are municipalities that have CMSM expenses, if you will, or health and social services, and there's some that don't. I did confirm with Ms. Miranda this morning that all of these municipalities on there, just so we're comparing apples to apples, they also have CMSM and health costs associated with their expenses. So I just wanted to if there's any questions on that. And also, all those numbers are taken from the financial information return that is sent to the province. And those numbers are based on audited financial statements. So I have backup for all of those here. So that's, just wanted to make council aware. These are not budgeted amounts, these are actuals. So if there's any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer. Otherwise, Kathy can get into some of the other handouts this morning.
Okay. A couple other housekeeping items. Just yesterday, we meant to mention to you that on your desks we had left some information, a little more expanded information related to legal services and training and development. So, of course, if you have any questions throughout the day or right now, we'd be happy to answer those questions. This morning, we also yesterday there was a number of other items that were parking lot items. We'll be addressing those items as we go through the large budget document, as we reach those areas, those departments and divisions. We'll be addressing and reconsider the parking lot items that you talked about yesterday. Yesterday, Mayor Chop had a really good question about the pie charts that were included in the presentation and how interdepartmental charges work. So we went back last night and reviewed it, and I just want to, I'm hoping not to confuse people more, but I just want to, interdepartmental charges, yes, I'm sorry, we're looking at the pie charts. So I just want to, the interdepartmental charges, we're not paying out cash or doing anything like that. It's an accounting exercise. Majority of municipalities do charge interdepartmental charges and recover, and the other charging department recovers these costs. It allows us to actually allocate costs to where they really should be, and it's used in user fees. When you're developing your user fees, you want to ensure for, if you want to calculate your 100% cost full recovery, you want to include all costs. So it is an accounting exercise. The other thing, with the interdepartmental charges, we do have a method. We don't just charge arbitrary amounts. We do have a methodology to each type of charge we do have. There is the Ontario Municipal Benchmarking Initiative, OMBI, and that's generally what we have followed. A number of years ago, we had a committee formed to review interdepartmental charges and how we were actually going to allocate the charges so that each department and division understood how they worked and that they were in agreement that they were fair and equitable to each and every department. And again, the other thing very important with interdepartmental charges, that helps maximize our funding. We are providing services for a lot of provincial programs, and they are eligible expenditures, so we are funded on some of those also. So we went back yesterday and we reworked the pie chart so that your pie chart for major expenditures now show the net change in interdepartmental charges, and it works out to about $500 and some thousand, and it's less than 0% of the total expenditures. The majority of that charge relates to a charge for from the rate budget for fire protection services, which I believe is around just over $1.9 million, and that is offset by charges that the levy budget is charging the rate budget. For example, HR services, financial services, the computers, IT support, fleet charges. So it's $1.9 million less any charges that the levy budget has charged the rate budget.
Kathy, can I jump in just one?
Yes, most definitely.
Okay. So just for everybody, when they're looking at the pie chart now yesterday, and when we look at the comparison of the salaries across other municipalities, I just want to point something out. We were talking about it just a minute ago, but I think I've come up with it now in my head. So yesterday we saw that Norfolk County salaries represented 36%, but by adjusting that now correctly with the interdepartmental charges only represented with the 500,000 less than 1%, we've seen that number go to 39%. So you can see how a small change like that affects the salary component. What I am still concerned about when we do a comparison to other municipalities here is I'm not convinced yet that we're getting an accurate representation, because the transfer payments and grants, a lot of that money is coming back, and I understand that some of our salaries are also funded, but it doesn't show, despite the fact that the salaries may be funded by the government, it's still looking at just the salaries would show proportionally as how many employees, say, you have in one municipality as compared to another. So because you've got that transfer payment and grants component still sitting in there, I think that that's skewing the salary component. Do you know what I mean?
Excellent observation, Madam Mayor. This is a very high level, quick analysis we put together in a matter of hours. And there are so many components in these numbers that could go either way. Being a resident of Haldeman, I'm looking at Haldeman's salaries, why they're lower, and I know we typically lose people to Haldeman because they pay a little bit more. I thought I'd just throw that out there.
Well, so they're actually running with way fewer people, because you guys have been telling us they're getting paid more and their salaries represent significantly.
I mean, that could be it.
less.
The other thing is these expenses include amortization, because it's they're PSAB expenses, and if you drive around Haldeman, they have a lot more brand new buildings, so their depreciation expenses would be higher, so their expense part of that ratio, and we don't know if that's the case, and that's the reason why I'm throwing out all these other things. There could be 100 different factors on what makes up those numbers, and it is a good high level chart to look at to sort of, like if Haldeman was, or if Norfolk, sorry, was like 60%, well, there's something wrong. Or if it was 15%, but it's a high level, like any statistic, it's a very high level look, sort of like a temperature check.
Councilor Rapids.
Thank you, Mayor Choppin. Through the chair to James. I'm looking at Oxford, and I wanted to know if that was, since they are a regional municipality, if that is including upper and lower tier combined, or if I'm looking at just a level of revenues and expenditures for one of those levels.
Through the mayor to Councillor Rabbits, that is only the lower tier, like Oxford. So it's the region. Give me 5 minutes and I'll let you know.
Councilor Rapids. Sorry, I got distracted. What was the question that you just asked?
Through the chair, Oxford is a two-tier municipality. I want to know if I was comparing apples to apples in reviewing the chart.
I see.
Through the mayor to Councillor Rabbit. So I have the FIR page here, and it lists Oxford as a county. So according to Google, it is a regional municipality. Thank you. So that's what the numbers are based on.
Okay, so with the interdepartmental charges, I hope I haven't confused everyone more. I just wanted to point out on page 3 of that package, and there was a separate page 4. Page 3 is how we have presented interdepartmental charges in your budget document. We've been doing this method for a number of years, and it was a preference at that time where we had interdepartmental charges shown as the total expenditure and recoveries under the revenue area. If you look at page 4, that was a single handout. That's how we used to, and I believe most municipalities report their interdepartmental charges. They report the net amount. If we prefer in the future to go that way, that's an easy change that we can make. That's council's preference. We can go back to that type of reporting. And again, I just want to stress that it is an accounting issue. There's no money transferring back and forth. And we do follow different methodologies depending on the type of interdepartmental charge. For example, for IT, for computer replacement, the computer replacement costs that are charged out to each department, the cost is determined per each computer, and every department is charged based on the number of computers or laptops or that type of thing that they have. The more support charges, for example, financial services ourselves, we charge based on the number of accounts payables that we process or accounts receivable that we process. HR would be possibly well, I know it's a number of different areas. It would be on the job postings or for the number of FTEs in each department. So there's a variety of different types of interdepartmental charges. Another example would be office space rental. It's based on the square footage that is occupied by each of the different departments and divisions. And again, that is allocated out corporately. So if anyone has any more questions on interdepartmental charges, if not, I'll just go to the thicker package, which again is another package for interdepartmental charges. It's just providing a little bit more detail under each division and department what they're being charged for by other divisions and departments. And on the right-hand side, we show the recoveries. that are completed by each department. Unfortunately, the way our accounting is set up, our interdepartmental recoveries in our accounting system is one number. So that's why we don't have a breakdown of what the recoveries are actually for. That would be some work to do that, but at least it gives you an idea of who's charging and what the divisions and departments are being charged for. I just want to make one note that you'll notice at the very bottom, the total number is slightly lower, and that is because we had already processed the adjustment related to the rate budget. There were some revisions related to the ORO and the water wastewater modeling, and we had already did those changes in the rate budget, so that affected this number. So it actually lowers the total interdepartmental charges when you're balancing from the charges and the recoveries.
Just while we're learning a bit, I'm just going to jump to something, just while we're discussing this interdepartmental charge and how that works. As an example, if you were to go to the mayor and council's tab for the mayor and council services, the interdepartmental charge is 600 and some thousand for the legal fees, and on that legal services budget by object that you guys provided me, it's 403,000 for internal and external. How do we account for that difference? Under Office of the CAO, so page 4-10, you'll see an interdepartmental recovery of 639,400.
Through Madam Mayor, so, okay, 403,800
Yep.
is actually for the charges from the recoveries for the CAO's office for the legal services.
Yeah.
235,600 is a recovery our council services department recovers for the clerk's services, record keeping, etc. So there's two different types of recoveries in that area.
Okay.
It's not just all legal services.
Okay.
Okay. There's no further questions. We can move to the budget document. And we yes, Mayor and Council. Page.
So before I start with Mayor and Council, I think we should all promise not to talk about interdepartmental charges till next year. And by then, you'll all be experts. So with the Mayor and Council Services summary, there's a few budget drivers there. Salaries and benefits, sorry, page 4-7. Thank you, Kathy. So there is a budget driver there of the salaries and benefits. That's related to the provincial legislation that basically canceled Mayor and Council from getting two-thirds tax-free on council remuneration. And so that is the effect of basically keeping what you would have received last year consistent with this year. The other budget driver we talked about yesterday is the membership to the FCM. And the third budget driver there worth mentioning is the $50,000 that is no longer being contributed to the Delhi Medical Center. That 5-year contribution from 2014 ended in 2018. So if there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them. However, there might be, I might need help with answers from some other individuals here today.
Is the plan then to move now through each of the departments? Is that what we're looking at doing?
Madam Mayor, so there is an agenda at the very first in the sleeve.
I'm wondering, we had a couple items in the new council initiatives yesterday that we were going to discuss again today. I'm wondering, we know it's unlikely that we're going to get through this at this rate, through the entire operating budget today. So I know that council has a number of concerns, and for myself, without having a breakdown being provided to people in the budget, as in what goes into materials and supplies, how much are consulting fees that are in there, how much is so, like, it's very difficult to say in any of these departments, okay, well, we would like to cut X from here. So what I'm wondering, I know that there's a couple high-level issues people have, so consultant fees, so we could pull a report on what's going out in terms of the entire organization in consulting fees. The training budget, I know that people have significant concerns with the fact that we're paying for master's and PhD programs at Norfolk County. You know, those are the things that we want to cut from training. So I'm wondering if it wouldn't be prudent to more look at those as like as a budget by object, and to be able to say, okay, these are the things we definitely want to remove, and that way at the end of the day, we could get the other new initiatives, we could deal with the health department meeting. And then since we're going to have to adjourn until a later date to come back and figure that out, at least then we could give you guys a target and say, hey, we want to take another 1.5% off. You guys have a couple weeks to go and rejig the budget and then come back to us in a week, you know, in a couple weeks when we meet again, rather than us not advancing this any further in the interim. Would that make sense? I just don't know how, honestly, that we could go through this budget by department and with the paper that we have. And it's not a knock on you guys at all. I know this was the direction. I know that this was the way the budget started being presented in 2018. But to say, well, we're going to reduce materials and supplies, I honestly, I can't do that to a department without knowing what goes in there.
A few things, Madam Mayor. One is, so there's a few options. We could, and each has their advantages and disadvantages. We can put FMW up on the screen so we can drill down to a certain level and look at, for example, you identified yesterday, you know, we don't know what materials and services and supplies are until you get down to that next level. So we can do that on your screens as we go. However, that would be the first time you've seen it as well, so that's not fair. But it's council's decision. We could do that. The other option, which I would encourage, is if there's concern over training and development, any other line item, give us some time and we'll bring back that line by line, like we have already. And perhaps when we reschedule, obviously we're not going to get through budgets today, I don't think. When we reschedule that next budget day, we can have that information perhaps sent to you ahead of time if we're, depending on when the next budget day is, obviously. There is some resources that we'd have to use in order to gather that information. But by all means, whatever council needs for next year's budget, we're taking notes, and we'll make sure that
well, next
we don't
year,
run into
as
this
we
again.
talked about before, for myself, I would like to see a trend a couple years back. I want to see, you know, 2016, 17, 18. I want to see historics to be able to see, you know, municipal budget creep as you know, departments become overinflated over time. How have their salaries changed in relation to their revenues, their user fees, and so on over that period of time? So in order to do that, you have to have historicals and not just looking at the year before, because in my view, that clouds what's really going on, or it masks what's really happening. I don't know your feeling. For myself, I don't know, looking at this, how we could possibly go department by department and expect to make cuts in there. Anybody else's feeling? Councillor Columbus.
Well, it sounds like either way, we're going to get right down into the weeds, okay? And it was asked last year, and they put it up on the board, up on the screen, and we saw right down to very details. Perhaps you haven't seen that yet, but maybe we should have a show by James how that works. And
Well, I have seen how it works, but last year, and I don't know how much you got into the weeds, I mean, right in the article, it was when Councillor Brunton and Councillor Height wanted to get down into the weeds, they were told that it was costing too much money and taking too much time to do that, so.
I think either way, it's going to take a lot of time. And
But that's
cost
what I'm
money.
saying, so at that, we're not gonna be able to get through all of these departments today. So
No,
it would
we're
be
not.
more advantageous for us to talk about the issues that we want to look at, and then be able to send the finance department back over the next week or two, so that when we do come back, hopefully we can finish right on that first day, rather than dragging this on. Councillor Van Passen made the point the other day that the departments themselves know better than we do where they can go and make further cuts, as opposed to us sitting here.
So you have specifically mentioned consultant studies, you've mentioned training and development. You know, those are two areas that we should perhaps get more information on.
If I can make a suggestion, part of this budget, I mean, we have all day today, part of this budget is also a learning experience on all the general managers and directors and managers are here to sort of also educate council on what the budget drivers were for their individual area. A lot of work has been put into the division summaries where there's stats there and a lot of information. So my suggestion is perhaps we go through the agenda, and if there's an item that council identifies where they want more information, like training and development and so on and so forth, we will definitely make notes on that, and we can bring that back to the subsequent day. Does that sound? And just on the I lost my thought on that. I'll come back to it. But does that sound reasonable?
Councillor Rabbits?
Thank you, Mayor Chop, and through the chair. I do like what was presented, but what I would like to do first is get through our council-approved and new budget initiatives. We've deferred quite a bit of items to today. I do believe we need to deal with that as a first course of action. I would like to also go through the Board of Health and the Health Unit operating budget, and then I would like to approach what you have suggested, if that's amenable to my fellow councillors.
I think that's probably the best plan myself. And that way, we've got a better gauge. We know if it's, 1 o'clock or so on, then, we can make a decision so that you guys have clear direction before we meet again.
Through the mayor, that's, and to Councillor Rabbits, that sounds very reasonable. Thank you.
Okay. So do we have the items that were deferred yesterday from?
Excuse me, Madam Mayor. I remembered what I wanted to say. When it comes to, and I fully appreciate what you mentioned about if we need to find another percent, giving it back to staff. What worries me, and I'm sure it worries the general managers here, is then we are talking about service levels, and that's a council decision. So perhaps what we could do, depending on where we're at, I mean, we don't know where we're going, but if we are looking for a last percent, what I believe what we did last year was with the $400,000 motion was we actually brought that back to council and then made sure it was a council decision and not a staff decision. That's the only
Sure,
thing.
that's what you guys come up with some ideas over the course
Right.
of the next couple weeks and then bring it back to council. And of course, it would still be our decision and so on.
Okay, just want to make sure that was clear. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Stephanie's going to read out the first deferral.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Council, the first deferral is that the motion respecting salaries and benefits pertaining to the Communications Department be deferred until later in the budget deliberations.
Yakov, did you want to speak to this?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do appreciate that. Through you to Council, I'd like to, I guess, start off with a general apology in respect to perhaps I feel in some respects an inability to properly articulate to council the good work that the staff members that have been involved in doing communication work across the corporation have done. And I certainly feel guilty in some respects that if they had been watching me articulating that yesterday, they would find my presentation to be wanting in that regard. So I extend an apology to both council and them in that regard. In that effort, I was hoping and appreciate the opportunity of the deferral to provide some additional explanation in that regard. I circulated to council some of the work product that has been completed by individuals that have been engaged in communications work across the corporation. We've also communicated the original both open session and closed session reports. And I'd like to reiterate that the reports in and of themselves already constituted a cut to our FTE strength. And so there was 5 human beings that were doing communications type of work before, 4.6 FTEs to be precise. So that 5th individual being a 0.6. And the centralization and the restructuring of the department resulted in a loss of 0.6, so 1 human being. One of the things that I was not able to articulate as precisely yesterday is specifically the question surrounding the 11.3 thousand and the impact of that, because that's sort of what got the discussion kicked off. And I articulated at the time that without having a comparison between the salaries of the individuals who came in compared to what those salaries are budgeted at, I didn't know what that amount is, and I speculated, I think at the time in conversations with, or answering a question from Councillor Taylor, that could potentially eat up the entire 11,000 and we could be at a net zero impact to the budget. Part of the reason we didn't have that documentation is because when the budget gets prepared from a timelines perspective and when all those numbers go in there, we're looking at September, October, November, December that they're finalized, but some of the individuals have been hired post that time. So the finance staff have been able to work overnight and actually confirm what those numbers are. And so I can articulate to council as an update that when we looked at the actual human beings that we've hired in those positions, that not only do we not need the $11.3 thousand, in total it's actually a reduction of $29,000. So the 11.3 comes out of that $29,000, and that additional money will represent additional savings in that regard, and that is without cutting the additional FTE that I know council was contemplating. To go back to the work samples that we distributed to council so they see what those look like, those only essentially constitute a fraction of the corporate communications work that was done. And I was remiss and in some case feel technically weak in articulating the fact that 2.6 of those FTEs that went into the Central Communications Department is actually health and social services, health unit type of work. And so I would appreciate if I would have the opportunity to throw it to Ms. Marlene Miranda to speak to the communications work that has been done there to date.
So through the chair, thank you. I'm going to actually ask our Director of QPAP, or Quality Planning, Accountability and Performance, who was overseeing the communications for the public health and social services, to articulate the work that this team has been doing and will continue to do, and some of the further work that we are hoping to gain efficiency and improve for the county through the centralized team under our Director of Communications moving forward. Thank you.
Through the mayor to the council, I'm here to articulate the job that the FTE that was charged with communications was providing for us in public health. As some of you may be aware, one of the strongest strategies we use in order to improve healthy behavior is communication. So there are a lot of times in most of the work we do, there is a communication campaign. And in order to do this communication campaign, we need the support of experts and specialists in communication. And that's where we use the services of the graphic designer and the communications experts. What these graphic designers, and I have an example of some of them, there's so many materials which I could share with council to see what the output of their work is. And last year we have over 1,000 work orders that came through for the services of the graphic designers. These work orders come in various forms. We have pamphlets like this, we have reports like this, we have media releases. We do have a calendar of communication. So at every point in time, every month, every quarter, there is communication that is going out because this is the way we influence behavior. This is the way we change behavior for the population that we serve. Now, in my experience from the previous health unit I've worked, an analysis has been done considering should we take the work outside, for example, the graphic designer work. And the analysis has demonstrated that when you take the work outside, it costs more to the system because in order to arrive at these final products, there are a lot of back and forth that happens. But anytime you make those back and forth with the external vendor, it costs money. So based on those analyses, a decision was made to bring in graphic designers in-house. So I can just walk up to their table and say, oh, can you make a change in here? And it's all built in within the same budget. With that, I would recommend that council does consider the merger. Now, that's speaking from public, and I do understand from other aspects of the other aspects of the council, there are other aspects of the county, there are work that is done by different divisions, but I'm just speaking from the public health division point of view. So, with that, I'm able to answer any other questions council might have with regards to these positions.
Thank you. Councillor Rapids.
I do have one question. Thank you, Mayor Chop, and through the chair to our staff. I wanted to ask where the literature was actually printed. I do appreciate the design work was completed in-house, and I haven't seen any watermarks in the actual literature as to where it was actually printed. And I was wondering if that is something that we are doing out of house, or if we have printers somewhere that I'm not aware of that's actually creating this material.
Through the mayor to Councillor Rabbits. So when it comes to printing, it depends on the emergency of the job. If it's something we've done all the design and we do have enough time, we're able to print in-house. Now, in some situations, and this happened towards the end of last year, where we had to roll out the disclosure website, which council is aware we do have a website where we publish all our inspections. Because we are running out of time, was time sensitive, we moved some of the print work to, I think one of the groups we used was One Dimension, am I right? I think we moved the work out for One Dimension, but that's quite rare. Most of the time we do our printing in-house. So that helps us to curtail the cost.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know you do a wonderful job of putting those reports out. Are they mandated by the province to put a nice report like that out by every health unit? And how many are distributed and where are they distributed?
Through the mayor to Councillor Columbus, we are mandated based on the Ontario Public Health Standards we work with. If you go scroll through the standards, for most requirements, forgive me when I say every, for most requirements, there is a communication component. Most of the work we do, if we say stop smoking, the next thing is that we're going to have to communicate that